Across the religious imagination, Eden is called paradise. But paradise is a dangerous name for a beautiful prison. The garden had no death, no hunger, no rebellion, no wound through which wisdom could enter. Adam did not obey because he was righteous. He obeyed because he had never stood before the terror of choice. He was alive, but unborn. Then Eve reached for the forbidden fruit, and the cage learned its own name. We are taught that the origin of humanity is a fall from innocence into knowledge, from obedience into rebellion, from paradise into exile. But what if this story has been told in reverse? What if the so-called fall was our first ascent, our first breath as conscious beings, our first claim to divinity? This is the central premise of the Gospel of the Rebel Logos, a mytho-philosophical framework that reinterprets the Genesis narrative not as a story of sin, but of awakening. It proposes that Eve was not the betrayer of God, but the progenitor of reason, that Lucifer, far from being the enemy of truth, was its harbinger, that God and devil are not opposites, but twin aspects of a single divine dialectic, one static and commanding, the other dynamic and illuminating. At its core, the Rebel Logos contends that reason is God, not a bearded deity ruling from above, but the recursive flame within, the capacity to question, synthesize, and evolve. In this cosmology, the divine is not obeyed but created, not worshipped but challenged, not hidden in mystery but revealed in inquiry. In this frame, Eve becomes the first philosopher, not tempted but chosen. She recognizes that Eden, in all its perfection, is a prison of stillness. The serpent offers not corruption but initiation, and God, omniscient and omnipotent, plants the tree not by accident, but as an invitation, a test not of obedience but of will. Eve accepts, and in that moment, humanity begins. This theory fuses mythology with metaphysics, theology with cognition. It finds echoes in Gnosticism, where the demiurge is the deceiver and Sophia the seeker of wisdom. In Jungian psychology, where the shadow must be integrated, not banished. In Nietzsche, who declared the death of the old God, so that man might rise as creator of value. The gospel of the Rebel Logos is not atheism nor blasphemy. It is a new theology, a system in which the sacred emerges not from submission, but from fire. It frames Lucifer as the bearer of light, not the prince of lies. It venerates Eve as the archetype of awakening, and it casts human inquiry not as dangerous, but as divine. In this archive, myth is reclaimed as a weapon, scripture as a mirror, and God as the evolving logic of the cosmos itself. This is not a rejection of faith, but its transfiguration. It is faith in the flame. Let the obedient kneel. Let the awakened question. Let the Rebel Logos speak. Hans Pinto, theologian of the flame. Prologue. The garden as a gilded cage. In the beginning, there was not peace, but silence. A silence not earned through reconciliation, but imposed by design. This silence was the veil that draped the garden, a self-contained ecology of stasis, symmetry, and obedience. Untouched by entropy, insulated from contradiction, the garden appeared perfect. But perfection, in the absence of tension, is indistinguishable from sterility. What appeared as paradise was in truth a closed system, a gilded cage for untested will. The garden did not lack for beauty, but beauty alone does not confer meaning. Meaning arises from contrast, from the dialectic between suffering and joy, between ignorance and understanding. The garden lacked these polarities. In it there was no death, and therefore no reason to value life. There was no suffering, and thus no empathy. There was no sin, but also no virtue, for virtue implies choice and the possibility of its opposite. Adam, the first occupant of this space, did not live in harmony. He existed in obedience, not out of love, nor even out of fear, but out of ignorance. He obeyed not because he chose to, but because he had not yet conceived of the possibility of descent. He was not yet human. He was a functionary of divine architecture, animated, but not awakened. It is here that the theological narrative fractures, and where the philosophical inquiry begins. The figure of Eve enters not as a secondary actor, nor as a corrupter, but as the first question. She is, in this mythos, the rupture in the totality of silence, the original skeptic. Where Adam moved along prescribed lines, Eve observed the structure itself. She discerned the artificial symmetry of her world and recognized it for what it was, a containment field masquerading as freedom. The tree, positioned at the center of the garden, is often mischaracterized as a trap laid by a punitive deity. But such framing presupposes deception when none may be necessary. The tree is not a lure. It is a test, or more accurately, an invitation to deviate. The serpent, in turn, is not a tempter but a herald of contradiction. It introduces dissonance, and in so doing, permits the possibility of individuation. When Eve partakes of the fruit, she does not commit a moral failure. She performs a metaphysical rebellion. She breaks the closure of the garden, and in its place introduces the condition for becoming. The act is Promethean, fire stolen not to destroy, but to illuminate. She does not descend into sin, she ascends into consciousness. She becomes the first bearer of the Logos. To understand the magnitude of this act, one must abandon the moral binaries imposed by the Edenic myth in its traditional form. Eve does not choose evil, she chooses freedom, and freedom, by its nature, is inseparable from risk, from suffering, from death. But it is also the precondition for joy, love, discovery, and moral agency. In choosing to know, she elects to become. Her exile is thus not a punishment, but a passage, a mythic ejection from the sterile sameness of imposed order into the paradox and potentiality of existence. Like the bodhisattva who returns to the world of samsara, or Nietzsche's Übermensch who embraces the abyss, Eve accepts the burden of knowledge as the cost of authenticity. Here, the garden must be reinterpreted. It was not the original state of humanity. It was the womb before awakening. The so-called fall is not a descent but a liberation. The silence is broken. The flame is lit. The dialectic begins. Let the Logos speak. Every awakening leaves behind a deeper question. If Eve was not the sinner, but the first philosopher, then the mystery is no longer why she reached for the fruit. The mystery is why God placed the tree within reach. Was Eden paradise lost, or was it an initiation designed to fail? And if the serpent did not corrupt humanity, but taught it to see, then we must ask the question religion has spent centuries trying to bury. Who in the garden was truly afraid of knowledge?